opening remarks and context for this initiative. Following, Justus Schollmeyer, founder at RubidiumData, will walk us through a demonstration and presentation of the Data Lab platform itself. Following the demo, we'll hear policy perspectives from two distinguished experts, Arauz from CIPER and I3T, and Jonah Allen from the Jain Family Institute, who will discuss potential applications of these tools and the relevance for policymaking. Then we will open the floor for your questions and discussion. And finally, Isabel will return with closing remarks. We are using the tool for Q&A provided by Google Meet. In the bottom down of your screens, you will find a square made by dots. It goes for other options, other tools. And there you will find the Q&A tool that you can start using from now, and we will be collecting questions and be answering them after the presentation and first comments. So please feel free to submit all questions you have throughout all the session. And now I will give the floor to Isabel, who will start with our initial opening remarks.
Thank you, Nico. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Isabel Estevez, co-executive director of I3T. To give you some context, we're a brand new industrial strategy think tank, and along with RubidiumData, we're partners in the development of this productive capabilities data lab. The lab itself is a nonprofit project. We're working to build this out as a global public good, a good that's dedicated to creating and open sourcing data that's specifically tailored to the needs and the challenges of industrial strategy. And by that, we mean challenges like building supply chain resilience in the face of trade disruptions, or accelerating and green transformation of energy systems and industrial systems. We're talking about challenges like industrialization of commodity-dependent countries, or reindustrialization in countries that have deindustrialized over the past decades. We're also talking about goals like building win-win trade relationships or co-developmental value chains rather than extractive ones. And we're also talking about missions like improving the inclusion of small and medium firms rather than reinforcing monopolies. So all of these are challenges that require us to clearly understand what productive capabilities we have, what we don't have, what we want to have, and how to develop those capabilities most effectively. So our goal of the Data Lab is to make all of that easier for you, for our government partners, for our research and civil society partners. For all of you, we want to provide you with the data and the tools that make industrial strategy research and design faster and better by making it more empirically grounded and more inclusive. Many of us on the team have also worked in government, so we know that industrial strategy analyses have a tendency of going straight into the drawer because they don't provide sufficient granular or implementation-oriented insights. And part of that reason has been that researchers have historically had to rely on economic statistics, which are quite aggregated, and building more fine-grained data sets from scratch required unimaginable amounts of work. But that's no longer the case. Today, large language models have made it possible to engineer systems that can read, write, and structure information like well-trained researchers. Or put differently, if somebody has published something somewhere, it can be found, and the relevant piece of information can be extracted and put into structured formats. This is the same process that a researcher would follow, but instead of instructing one assistant or one research assistant, we can now build and deploy thousands of knowledge gatherers to collect that data for us 24/7. So to give you a quick overview of some of the tools that we're developing using these new capabilities, first of all, at the core of the Data Lab are the highly detailed technology breakdowns and value chain data sets that we built from scratch, based always on the best available information in articles, reports, web publications, patents, and much more. Second, taking those detailed technological breakdowns as the base, we build productive capability data sets that map companies, talent, capital goods, labor, value added, and many more features onto every single node of the value chain. So we're talking thousands and thousands of nodes per technology chain. Third, we have tools for automated interviews that allow us to gather input from stakeholders at scale. So from firms, workers, communities, and other stakeholders who can help better understand problems and build better solutions. And fourth, we're embedding these data tools into specific industrial policy design methodologies, like procurement policy, so we can implement those policies more quickly and with more precision and therefore impact. Now we'll get into the weeds of how some of those tools work in just a moment, but before that, I also want to say a very quick word about the origin story of this project that's helpful for understanding our approach. I think the origins of the Data Lab can be traced back to the work of 3 research communities that have gradually converged into this project over the past decade. One is the development economics community, and specifically a working group on productive capabilities and algorithms for industrial targeting that we had at the University of Cambridge about 8 years ago, and that was led by the great economist and industrial policy guru Ha-Joon Chang. At the time, we tried to systematize best practices and criteria for industrial targeting, also drawing on lessons from concrete policy experiences. And we learned a lot from the methodologies that were developed on the job by communities of policymakers and practitioners, including the Ecuadorian experience, which Andrés Arauz will speak about later, and which my co-director at I3T, Santiago Vázquez, was also a part of. But until very recently, these research communities have been limited by the fact that the data we had at our disposal, namely trade data and other macroeconomic and production data, was extremely aggregated and did not reflect the reality of production in sufficient detail or grounding in technological systems. So it couldn't capture the complexity of the systems that we were trying to change. And that's where a third community of research and practice entered into the equation. And that's the innovation theory community, which is where Justus Schollmeyer, the lead architect and engineer of the data lab, hails from. That community has developed all kinds of useful tools and methodologies for understanding both the evolution of technological systems and automation. So the tools that we're going to present to you today are a product of this bridging between industrial policy-oriented economic research, technology and innovation research, and applied industrial policy research developed through policy implementation and practice. All of this, again, enabled and supercharged by building systems that control large language models and other artificial intelligence tools to turn unstructured data into structured data. And this complex work that the data team at Rubidium is doing is done by 18 great people, all building and improving on this every single day. We're also gradually incorporating more interdisciplinary dialogue with researchers from other specializations. For example, energy economist Jonah Allen, who you'll hear from today, who focuses on energy transition value chains and equitable benefit sharing. We've also really benefited from dialogue with many researchers at the World Bank, like Jad Salhab, Gregor Seminuk, Penny Neely, and Christian Kettles, all of whom have provided great feedback on our methodologies. With the bank, we've also already piloted projects on value chain analysis, industrial targeting, and company mapping for the Romanian government. And we're also very excited now to work with our partners at the African Union, with whom we're starting to think through the tools that how to use our tools for regional procurement-led industrialization strategies. And finally, the European Commission. With the European Commission and the World Bank, we're piloting our tool for automated large-scale interviews of small and medium enterprises to inform energy policy. We're very grateful for these partnerships, and we look forward to building on them as we continue to experiment with different tiers of this research. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Justus to walk us through how our tools work. Be warned that the presentation may briefly get a bit technical, but please bear with us. It's worth spending a few minutes digging into the details to understand the applications of our approach to policy. You're also always welcome to reach out to us to dig further into the weeds. And remember, again, at any time you can post questions in the chat using the Q&A feature. Just click the button at the bottom right that looks like a square with a bunch of dots and scroll down to the question feature. Over to you, Justus.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you everyone for joining. Maps of value chains have to reflect how production really works. If they don't, we can't connect them to concrete productive capabilities. This idea, starting from the real structure of production, is at the core of our approach to decomposing value chains. Over the next roughly 10 minutes, I want to show you why this production reality cannot remotely be captured using trade codes and allude to some of the problems that stem from that. For those who are new to this, whenever a product crosses a border and goes through customs, it is registered by a trade code. The underlying classification is called the Harmonized System, or HS for short. The first 6 digits of any such HS code are standardized globally. That means the 6-digit HS code is the highest common resolution we have for comparable global trade statistics. Therefore, most existing approaches to value chain mapping rely on HS codes at 6 digits or even just 4 digits. We will now look closely at what that implies, and right after that, we'll walk through the data lab itself and discuss how it feeds into policy applications. So please bear with me, I promise. You will never look at the value chain maps based on trade codes quite the same way again after this short intro. So let's start with one of the most mature technical systems, the bicycle. If we look at it at the most downstream level of assembly, a bicycle is made up of a handful of key parts. For example, a frame, a head tube, and steering system. They all fall under the same 6-digit HS code: cycles, frames and forks, and parts thereof. Two things stand out. First, it doesn't matter whether the frame is made of steel, aluminum, or carbon fiber. They are all lumped together in the same 6-digit category. Second, this code doesn't just cover the frame and the fork, it also includes all of their parts. That means we can't look inside the subcomponents of the fork because every one of those parts is reported under the same code. We also need a rear wheel, a front wheel, a seat post, a headset, a handlebar, and shifters. All of these end up in the same HS code category: cycles, parts thereof, not elsewhere classified in item number 8749. Note that this category is defined by a negation, not elsewhere classified. That means it is an infinite bucket of completely different things like shifters, wheels, and seat posts, all grouped under the same code. Next, we have a drivetrain, a crankset, and crank arms. They fall under the HS code: cycles, parts, pedals, and crank gear and parts thereof. Again, the same issue with the first, like in the first code, the entire collection of components are collapsed into the same class. So let's go through this a bit quicker. Two more components: a braking system and rim brake calipers. Their respective HS code uses the same and parts thereof syntax, which again means the classification cannot distinguish between the different components inside a braking system. Then we have the inner tubes. They fall under the HS code rubber inner tubes of a kind used on bicycles. Then we have the tires, classified as rubber new pneumatic tires of a kind used on bicycles. And finally, we have the wheel rims and the spokes falling under cycles, parts thereof, wheel rims, and spokes. So at the customs level, all of this works perfectly well. But let's try to approximate some form of production reality. This is a very simplified description of how you might assemble these components in DIY style. And let me just read out loud the first few lines. You start with the frame, then fit the headset into the head tube and attach the steering system, securing the handlebar on top. Insert the seat post into the frame, install the crankset, and so on and so forth. You get the point. Now, let's see what happens when we try to describe the exact same process using only the 6-digit HS codes. Start with the cycles, frames and forks and parts thereof, then fit the cycles, parts thereof, not elsewhere classified, into the cycles, frames and forks and parts thereof, and attach the cycles, frames and forks and parts thereof, securing the cycles, parts thereof, not elsewhere classified on top. Insert the cycles, parts thereof, not elsewhere classified, into the cycles, frames and forks and parts thereof, and so on and so forth. So in the interest of time, let's stop here. I think you see the point. Even for a mature, purely mechanical system like a bicycle, describing a simple assembly using 6-digit HS trade codes is hopelessly underdetermined. Now imagine doing this for complex electronics or emerging technologies. The confusion will only get worse. See, for example, what happens when we break the bicycle down into 53 components without even distinguishing between different types of each component. We only increase the number of HS codes from our original 7 to just 10. Out of the 3 new ones, one is for the saddle and another is for the cycling computer. The cycling computer and its sensors fall under electrical machines and apparatus having individual functions not specified or included elsewhere in this chapter, not elsewhere classified in heading number 8543. You can imagine how many completely different devices end up in this category. It is essentially infinite. Our catch-all category, cycles, parts thereof, not elsewhere classified, now contains 23 different components, or 43% of everything on the list. Another 19 components, about 36%, are assigned to classes that explicitly include the component and all of its parts. The entire hierarchy is swallowed, making any decomposition impossible. So in total, 81% of all the components in this breakdown are either in a negatively defined, effectively infinite category or in a category that collapses all internal structure. So these here are screenshots of the relevant chapter that all of these mappings come from. In particular, the 8714 heading, which covers 94% of the 53 components we identified. And if you look at its heading, you will see the most disappointing thing. The HS codes we've been talking about for the past 7 minutes are not even specific to bicycles. As the heading shows, they apply to parts of motorcycles, bicycles, tricycles, etc., and carriages for disabled persons. This means that cycles, parts thereof, not elsewhere classified, and remember, 43% of all 53 components fall under the single code, could belong to a bicycle, but also to a motorcycle or even to a wheelchair. The system makes no distinction between any of them, and this is the case for the 94% of components we have been looking at. So to sum this up, I hope this makes clear why we believe HS codes should not be used for value chain analysis intended to guide industrial policy. They are fundamentally incapable of representing any actual structure of production, which is precisely what industrial policy is concerned with. At best, HS codes can be used for very rough screening, and even then only if we are willing to assume that the parts of a wheelchair, a motorcycle, and a bicycle are essentially the same. Which brings us finally to the Productive Capabilities Data Lab. So what you're looking at here is a screenshot of the navigation bar in our data lab, and we jump into the data lab right after this quick last part of the intro. It's arranged from left to right by increasing resolution of the underlying value chain representation. On the far left, our lowest resolution, we represent value chains with 6-digit HS codes. Remember, this is the highest resolution the global trade system can offer. On the far right, you see our highest resolution view, which we call systems and system types. To put this into perspective, the highest resolution we have in the global HS system is 6-digit HS codes, about 5,300 of them. IPNet is an attempt to map all potential value chains using these 6-digit codes. Then there are 4-digit HS codes with around 1,200 product classes. Greenplexity uses them to cluster inputs for green transition technologies. There are also 4-digit NACE codes to classify economic activities, about 615 groups in total. European countries usually classify their firms in NACE codes. And finally, we have roughly 420 4-digit ISIC codes, also used to classify economic activities. The important point here is that the highest resolution of your mapping is the highest resolution of your mapping. We call this the resolution barrier. If you have mapped value chains using 5,300 HS codes, you cannot go beyond that without breaking your map. If you have started with 1,200, you cannot go beyond that because trying to add granularity requires information that simply isn't present in the original mapping. Going in the other direction is easy though. You can always aggregate. You can collapse 5,300 6-digit codes into 1,200 4-digit codes, etc. A higher resolution can always be aggregated to a lower resolution, but not vice versa. This is why we need to construct our value chains at the highest resolution possible if we want them to apply to the reality of production, which is at the level of the systems and their types. We are talking here at a scale of millions of technological systems. Only at this level of granularity, we can link producers to the concrete products they make. So for example, a seat post for a bicycle, as opposed to cycles, parts thereof not elsewhere classified. Remember, this is actually the HS code for the seat post, which we now know can also refer to all kinds of motorcycle accessories or wheelchair components. And this now brings me straight onto the website here, which is at Valuechains.ai. You will find here the same navigation bar that we have just shown on the slide. And let me jump right in here to show or to demonstrate how we are decomposing or what we mean by systems and their types. I take the solar PV value chain here. This is also publicly available. the main idea is we start with first with the category of the system. It's in this case a solar PV system. And if you think of it from the perspective of a producer, then you would say as a producer, well, what type of solar PV system are you talking about? Why do we need to ask this question? Because there are grid-connected solar PV systems, there are off-grid systems, and there are hybrid solar PV systems. Grid-connected solar PV systems do not have battery banks. Off-grid and hybrid, they require battery banks. So this type distinction is the first one, and only once we have separated into types, and again, this is something that the HS code system makes more or less impossible, only then we start to decompose it into its components. What do these different value shares mean here? They represent, on this level of analysis, the different prevalence of these system types relative to one another. Grid-connected solar PV systems make up the majority of deployments worldwide. This is why, relative to the off-grid and the hybrid, this branch is larger. Now, as you can see here for the hybrid, we see as inputs currently the battery bank and the PV module array. This is simply because in order to represent this Sankey diagram here properly, we need to filter by value share. We're currently representing 0.3% as a minimum on this graph. But if I now click on hybrid solar PV systems, then you see we can now move this graph upstream. And suddenly we see that this hybrid solar PV system has a PV module array. It has DC wiring and connection. It has mounting structures. It has a hybrid inverter charger. It has a battery bank, etc., etc. What do these different value shares mean in this case now on this layer? Here we try to estimate what the relative cost share of these components are relative to one another and to machinery, additional inputs, and labor. So let's look, for example, here at the battery bank. We see there are, again, this is now the next layer. We repeat what we did at the beginning. We take the battery bank as a category of system, basically, and then we ask what are the different types. There's lithium-ion battery, there are sodium-sulfur battery banks, there are lead-acid battery banks, there are redox flow battery banks. But as you can see, if I actually click on it, we have even more opaque, or not opaque, but less prevalent versions here, like, for example, the zinc hybrid cathode battery. Again, this now represents the relative prevalence of these systems. So if I now go, for example, to zinc hybrid cathode battery, then you see we have again a deeper dive into the components and so on. We can now continue this until we end up upstream at the material level. None of this is perfect yet. This is, but it is definitely, as far as we think, a better representation of what's actually happening with these systems. And to maybe show you something else here, we do not only try to find out what the different components, etc., are. We also trace more information about the system. For example, here we have the hybrid solar photovoltaic system. We try to extract the function of it, the mechanism, the specifications, distinguishing features of this type relative to the other types. We trace the sources from where we took this information, and of course, each of these types, not these components themselves, but always the types of the components, because they are representing actual products. We map them to trade codes, and we also always explain, according to the general rules of interpretation provided by the World Customs Organization, why this particular system was mapped to this 6-digit code. We also keep track of the information about the prevalence estimate. Here, in this case, it's from an IEA report, and we also look for example products on Alibaba in order to then estimate the price distribution here, and we also provide as many sources as possible to the sources from where the information originally came from. Good. Now that we have these types mapped to trade codes, we can aggregate. In the first layer, we can aggregate over these types. So we are now basically jumping, maybe to show it like this here. Here we go from category to type to category to type to category to type. Since this is a graph in the backend, we can also just now aggregate this on the level of type. And this is what you're seeing here. And each of these types, again, was mapped to a trade code. And finally, this is then the second layer of aggregation. Only then we arrive at our trade code map with 6-digit HS codes. So this is the lowest level of resolution that we are representing here on the platform. But as you can see, it is fully traceable back to the original layer of systems and their types, and then their parts again and their types, and their parts again and their types, down to the material level. Once we have it in trade codes, of course, we could now do all the different trade estimates with it. For example, if we take here, I don't know, for example, Romania for the wind energy conversion system, then we can represent this graph in form of revealed comparative advantages, for example. And then we see that that we have, for example, a revealed comparative advantage in electric motors and generators. And in principle, yeah, this type of analysis is, of course, always possible. But the more interesting thing, and this is why we are developing this in the first place, we want to understand productive capabilities. So with this kind of breakdown on the level of the actual products and components and types, we can now aggregate a graph in, for example, this form here, and search in a given region, like, for example, Romania. So this is now a project that we did for the World Bank, or together with the World Bank for the Romanian government. We analyzed 3 value chains: battery for electric vehicles, plastic packaging, and wind energy conversion systems. First constructing this graph, and then taking each of these product categories and searching for concrete productive capabilities on the ground that provides these particular product types. So we would search for example, here, wind energy conversion systems makers, and distinguishing between the producers, the service providers, and the resellers. So this is information that comes actually from the websites of these companies. So we go and look for whoever sells these things, has a Romanian address, and can in the end be validated against the business registry in Romania. We will get to this back to this business registry in a second. But what we can already see here is we can now map these concrete entities, and we can track them across the different input layers following this value chain graph here. We also always provide of course the references to these companies, and then also the reasoning which underlies or explains on what grounds this company has been mapped to this particular product. The interesting thing about the project in Romania is that we have received through the World Bank from the Ministry of Finance the business registry information with all these different dimensions here. So we have the employees, we have the assets, we have the gross profit or loss, etc., the net turnover, the debt levels, etc. So we can basically represent the financial health of an entire value chain by just using these metrics properly. Just to put back into mind, or to imagine what the alternative would have been. The alternative would have been that we use the NACE code classification system that is being used by European countries. This would mean that all 800,000 plus firms in Romania are crammed into 620 categories. So this would imagine we would represent a value chain in terms of nice categories, and then we would map these companies to it. It would be completely, there would be so many false positives. It is not, it's not the case that we wouldn't have false positives here, but we're really looking for the exact producer of a particular good, and this good only, and not a huge class that might be a seat post or actually something from a wheelchair or from a motorcycle, as we have seen before. To give you a quick idea for why this could also be useful, so we have anonymized here the informations because aggregates are fine to show here. We can now navigate this graph here, and you will always you can imagine, of course, that when you take a product like here, a gearbox, and you search for gearbox makers, but then you also search for input shaft makers, ring gear makers, lubrication system makers, sun gear makers, etc. That in the end you will end up with many more companies on this layer than you would end up on this layer. And this is exactly where these relative value shares come in, because what we can now do is we can here we would just sum up the number of employees, for example, across the companies in these different input layers. But what we can now do is we can adjust them by this value share. And the most likely distribution that you would see is that going back here, when we actually go to the start of it, would be that when adjusted by the value share, the first layer is the one that has the most part of the value, because that's usually how it works, that in the further downstream you are, the more you have. Unless you are particularly strong in one of the inputs and have a revealed comparative advantage, something, I mean, it doesn't have to be a revealed comparative advantage, obviously, but you have just much more productive capability there. And this shows really well in Romania, because Romania is known for its auto supply sector, where they are making lots of bearings and these shafts, etc. And you can see, even when adjusted by the value share, we have a significant part of the value in this part of the input layer. What we are currently doing in this project is we are working on an algorithm that walks through this graph, uses this financial information that we have, and finds exactly these particular capabilities where we see that we are really strong in a particular input, ideally of a part of a value chain that takes up a high share of the value, but the downstream is not yet developed sufficiently. And by doing that, we can identify potentials for downstreaming where we already know we have actually upstreamed the capability, and we can now potentially keep more of the downstream. This is what we're currently doing for these 3 value chains that we were asked to look into. And this brings me to the final point before concluding that, and let me quickly check the time. Okay, it's also time to conclude that we are currently going from downstream upstream. So basically, from the final product, we construct it back to back upstream to the raw material. We have been we have often been asked, can't you turn this, do this the other way around? You start with, for example, a critical mineral, and then you construct the chain downstream. This is also something that Jonah Allen from Jain Family Institute is particularly interested in and will likely comment on later. That's something that we're also currently working on. And maybe one thing that I also do not want to forget here is that particularly, let's for example go here. So in this case of the project with Romania, we had access to this financial information. But what if you, for example, go into a country like Uganda? It is also possible here that we do our web search and we identify the companies that already do something in this space, either as service providers, resellers, or maybe producers. When we actually look in the value chain and we see they are particularly in the mounting structure space, there is production in Uganda. And now think of what if we actually put this, that's also what we're working on an actual map where we see the roads, etc., and we can use some Google Maps API or something to compute the logistic effort that it would take to connect a particular input layer with another input layer, etc. Here, by the way, we also in the Romania case, we have companies that have only one employee, and we identify them. They would never show up in trade data, so also the representation of small and middle-sized companies is possible here. And last thing, and then I conclude. Our goal is, we know that nobody has the time to do these breakdowns in such detail, but these breakdowns are needed in order to do good industrial strategy and analysis. So our plan with this platform is to make this data open source, to make it at least the part that is not sensitive, and to make it possible that that there is this one place that you can turn to when you need a good breakdown of a technology and a solid mapping to the trade codes, etc. And something that Jad Salhab from the World Bank, for example, has pointed out pretty early on was it would be amazing if this could be a place where when experts come there and they see, oh, something is not quite right, or here something has changed. Actually, there's this great paper, the cost share, the relative cost shares have actually changed between, for example, batteries and PV modules, that the platform is built such that this input can be provided, and in the next iteration of running through this, it is possible to integrate this information into the next improved version of it. This is what we're currently working towards in order to make sure that the information gap between policymakers on the one hand and producers on the other gets increasingly narrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justus. Now to continue with our webinar. I see some people clapping, so thank you very much, Justus. We have received some questions so far, so we are taking note of them so we can get back to the questions after our first comments. But now I want to introduce our two expert commentators. Andrés Arauz is Senior Research Fellow at CIPER with a PhD in economics from UNAM. He brings extensive experience leading industrial policies and strategic public investment, having served as Minister of Knowledge, General Director of Procurement, and Head of Ecuador's National Standards Agency Committee. And Jonah Allen is lead researcher for energy transition value chains at the Jain Family Institute. He holds a PhD in mineral and energy economics from the Colorado School of Mines. His research focuses on equitable benefit sharing in critical resource extraction and trade for the energy transition. So please, Andrés, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolás. First, I want to say wow, and enormous congratulations to the team. I think very complex ideas have been able to be transmitted fairly well and pretty clearly. And the first thing that comes to mind in terms of the comments that I want to make is that I think we're moving here from an industrial and trade policy perspective of a macroeconomist, or maybe even a mesoeconomist, if you want to that of a policymaker and an engineer and a community of engineers. And I think this is the bridge for that. I think this is a tool that we haven't had available many times, and it really questions and opens, I think, an entire field of industrial policy making that ties sort of economic analysis to the actual production and capabilities process in terms of knowledge, in terms of technology, in terms of parts, and of course, as we saw, in terms of materials. So, thank you, Nicolás. Sorry about the connection issue. I guess there was an issue with my bandwidth. I'm very sorry about that. I do want to reiterate a few points and then try to be very brief about my comments. But just like Jonah was saying, I think this is a crucial step, a bridge between the economist mindset of analyzing macro trade flows to a policymaker that has to actually go find the company, go find the technology, go find the specific spare part that perhaps we can produce in the domain that I'm trying to advise or execute or apply the policy. And then, of course, the knowledge that's embedded in the platform is huge because you're not just mapping products, you're mapping processes, technologies, companies, and then of course you are approaching to become basically an engineer of industrial policy in all the different domains. I was also telling you about the procurement, how this can be an extremely useful tool for procurement processes. In the case of Ecuador, we decided to turn procurement into an instrument of industrial development. And of course, we want to say, okay, how can we substitute some of the imports that the state itself is purchasing on a daily basis from different agencies? And of course, we decided to aggregate public sector demand to see if we reached economies of scale, and then try to determine, okay, these are the kinds of goods that we can substitute or replace by making them on our own, in our own country, with domestic producers and suppliers. But the question here is that, of course, we were only dealing with final goods, only those that show up in the purchasing category, in the catalog, in the procurement demand. But of course, when you can see the entire value chain, the opportunity for industrial development grows by several orders of magnitude, right? Because then you can apply these concepts that we did develop in Ecuador, which were called technological disaggregation, or you can call it technological decomposition, and technology transfer. Perhaps you can't make an entire electric vehicle yet in your own country, but by analyzing the entire value chain, or in the case of solar panels, you can determine which are the specific components that you may have the possibility to produce within the domestic capabilities that already exist, or that you are close to having with sort of in the range of the vicinity. But of course, most importantly, when you have these industrial policy ministries or agencies that need to work on a fine-tuned manner, now you can actually request tech transfer, not as a sort of broad political or rhetorical statement, oh, we need technology transfer, but you can come up with a list of very specific knowledge-related technology transfers from which company to which company, on which spare part or which technological process you need, so that you can become part of a larger, either regional or global value chain. So I think this is definitely the instruments that a procurement-based industrial strategy would benefit from. And then I wanted to also make a very quick comment about how this relates to knowledge more generally, right? So now that you have not just products, but technological types and technological processes, and even companies that are involved in those technological processes, you can then map the same information into the respective standard. For example, the International Electrotechnical Commission standards, or the International Standard Organization standards, or the IEEE standards. And of course, once you map into that area, you can definitely map into the sort of knowledge world in terms of the competencies of the staff, of the workers, of the specialized engineers and so forth that were involved in those value chains. So this definitely opens up a huge opportunity for opening knowledge, for making that knowledge available, not just for researchers, which are going to hugely benefit from this platform, but also to policymakers, engineers, and especially those fine-tuned, fine-grained aspects of policy around industrial, around the industry. Yeah, so thank you.
Go ahead, Jonah, the floor is yours.
Sure, yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to hear from Andres. I think he has a more specific example, and I think I'll be a little bit higher level in my comments. as it relates to my work in mineral and energy economics, at the risk of perhaps repeating or emphasizing some of the points that Justus made during his presentation. But first, as a short introduction, I'm a mineral and energy economist here at the Jain Family Institute, leading our work on minerals for development. So JFI is a nonprofit applied research organization founded by investor Bob Jain, working at the intersection of finance and public policy. So we take the instruments and frameworks of finance and apply them to issues of public policy concern in partnership with governments, civil society, and other local institutions. We are headquartered in New York and have an international and interdisciplinary team of economists, software developers, quantitative finance specialists, policy experts, and social scientists based primarily across the US, Europe, and Brazil. So within JFI, my team's mandate is to reduce information asymmetries and provide technical capacity to producer countries that are seeking to retain more of the benefits generated from raw material extraction, trade, and utilization for the energy transition. In practice, this really means we're working in two key areas: domestic resource mobilization and industrial development and around and from the extractive sector. So we provide technical capacity in those two areas: extractive sector taxation and management and investment of tax revenues, and minerals-based industrial policy design and implementation. So it's really around this second area primarily where we have been working with i3T and Rubidium, and where I'll focus some of my comments today. As the audience is probably very familiar with, the primary forms of minerals are worth only a small fraction of the total value of the products that use them, right? And energy transition supply chains are no exception here. So unsurprisingly, minerals-based industrial policies that seek to downstream in energy transition value chains have become a key objective for producer countries. In some cases, we've seen that it's even become necessary to justify extraction. So the challenge is that effective design and execution of industrial policies requires an integrated approach that accounts for a country's productive capacity, trade linkages, financing infrastructure, and market dynamics, so that industrial strategies around downstream processing, manufacturing, and recycling are truly actionable. In other words, it is immensely complex to implement these policies effectively and in practice. Meanwhile, we tend to think of and discuss these energy transition supply chains as linear steps, right? Raw material to refined material to, in the case of batteries, cathodes and anodes, to battery packs to electric vehicles. However, in reality, these are elements of a complex universe of interrelated products that can have many applications or uses, both within or outside of transition supply chains. So a key challenge is that as policymakers and as researchers, we actually have a very incomplete understanding of the complete web of related products here and the hierarchy of relationships between these products as they are used to assemble technology systems and their elements. So for most countries, developing green industrial policies or entering transition technology supply chains, it's not going to mean designing and building the next generation of EVs, solar panels, or wind turbines, not least because China is already dominating across these technologies, right? However, as discussed, there's this universe of products within these supply chains that countries can strategically target, which may also have key demand more broadly or outside of these transition supply chains. So the strength in Valuechains.ai is that it breaks down these systems into their technology systems and the types, not just the relevant HS codes to those supply chains of interest. So we can really understand what components they are built from, built with, and then link that knowledge to existing productive capacity within the focus country, as we saw with Romania and Justus' example. So the option, of course, for those that are interested still in HS code analysis and trade data analysis, as you saw, the disaggregation is there on the platform as well. But on a practical note, this means that policymakers aren't forced to make strategic bets on, let's say, other aluminum profiles or similarly vague categories. They can see which specific aluminum products those HS codes correspond to and what role they might play in a given chain. So it's about going a level deeper than existing tooling, which I like to say, screens potentially promising technologies to moving to implementation. That is how producers and engineers see the supply chain, not how economists and policymakers tend to view it. So the last point I want to emphasize in my comments, which may be less obvious here, is that there's then a host of second stage questions that we can start to address with this tooling when we move to the country level. So beyond identifying specific technologies, we might be able to think about tailoring the industrial targeting to the goals of the country. Is it to maximize employment? Do we want to look at the stage of the value chain with the higher labor requirements? Is it to target the component with the largest share of trade value in that supply chain step? Is it to target niche technology inputs where there's already productive capacity in the country? So questions like these and more, which I've already seen some points raised here in the comments, could all be informed by a more, let's say more developed and propagated version of the tool. So I'll end with those thoughts, but I'm happy to keep the conversation going with anyone in this call, and I will try and share my email in the chat here if anyone wants to reach out directly to discuss this more. But with that, I will pass it to Andres.
Thank you very much, Jonah. So we have received some very interesting questions that I will invite now Justus to join us back. So we'll start with a set of the first three questions that we received. First, we have Pravina Bandara. She's asking how are you estimating the component percentages in the methodology, or the percentage of the share. Then we have Marcus Thompson. He's asking if foundation AI models could be used to classify products instead of using HS codes. And then we have Jerome Hodge, who's asking if, for example, bicycle and wheelchair wheels are structurally similar, how to avoid creating overly granular categories. So we start with those three questions. I will give Justus the floor, and we continue with the rest afterwards.
Thanks a lot, Nico. And yeah, great questions. Thank you very much. So let me start with Pravina. Yes, so what we have actually the methodology paper here here on the website where you can where we dig into the different into the way of how we estimate the prevalence on the one hand, and then the cost share on the other. And we also have made explicit how the aggregation works here. So to say it in very straightforward terms, we basically just search for so once we have identified these different types, then we search for literature that tells us about the how common they are. And the metrics of being common, I think I saw this also in some other questions, they are different for different technologies. So for example, in the case of solar PV systems, it makes sense to look at how commonly deployed are they. In the case of, I don't know, some sort of screw or something, it would probably be, well, how frequently used is this kind of, so there, for some of these things, you will not find information about how common it is, or the way how prevalent something actually is in its use is definitely also regionally different, but also requires to look for different sources. So we really go into every technology type basically. The question needs to be answered and asked slightly differently, but it is in the end the estimate is a relative rate between these prevalence sources, and we also always keep track of where this information was taken from. So here in this case, it comes from the hybrid system data. Visualizations. Yeah, here you see actually that's a really good example of off-grid and edge off-grid photovoltaic systems. So this is from where these this information was taken from, and then for the off-grid, it comes from a different source, and for the grid type, it will come from somewhere, and we try to make it explicit here. If we do not there are certainly mistakes here, but if you run this algorithm, for example, I don't know, 50 times, you will end up with some error margin of these prevalence ratings that tell you sometimes the hybrid is maybe 3%, sometimes it's 5%, sometimes the off-grid is 10%, sometimes it's 8%. But there will always be some margin here. The alternative, by the way, is to have just absolutely no prevalence rating. So there's not a single breakdown that is doing this that I have found somewhere across the entire value chain. So it's an estimate. This was a very long question answer. Sorry for that. With regard to how important are HS codes, is it possible to use foundational models to prevent HS codes altogether and just classify in this fashion? Of course, it is possible, but the reason HS codes are so useful is that all trade is encoded in them. So this is the global standard. Every product that goes through customs somewhere needs to have these 6 digits, and this makes it comparable. And then on Comtrade, you can find this information with a delay of 2 months. So it allows us to monitor global trade. It is very useful for that. It is not very useful for using these categories in order to construct technological dependencies. And I hope this has become clear from the bicycle example. Then maybe to this last question from Jerome, that the bikes and the wheelchair wheels and the motorcycle wheels are kind of similar. So if you can make one, then you might be able to make the other. In principle, yes, if the category was actually wheels, but the category is not wheels. So most of the categories are, it is really pretty crazy if you look at them. They are negatively defined. They are most of the time cycles, parts thereof not elsewhere classified in item number 8749. And look at how different these items are. Now, these items are so different if at least they were referencing a bicycle, but they're also referencing a motorcycle with 800 cubic or something like that. So it is really, or a tiny motorcycle with 100 or less. It's the problem is the negative definition of the categories, which is basically infinite. I think these are all great questions, but yeah, these are the answers that I can think of.
Thank you very much, Justus. Before going to our next questions, we have Angelica and Elizabeth who have raised their hands and will share also a comment or question. I will ask you please to stay within 1 minute of in your comments. So please, Angelica.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. First of all, this is very exciting. I want to congratulate everyone involved in this project. I think I might have a few questions, but I just want to say that this is a great platform for countries that lack of knowledge to map, sorry. Well, I want to ask, for countries that have food dependency or energy dependency and maybe are not very industrialized, for instance, like Mexico, where I'm from, that we import most of our food and also energy, what would this platform help countries like Mexico and other developing countries also to reduce dependency in food and energy, or would it only be in industrial products? And I also want to ask about the procurement clubs that you mentioned in a working paper that I scanned. For instance, when it comes to agribusiness, I understand that about 80% of the food of agribusiness is controlled completely vertically by 6 businesses. So I'm curious if this platform that I understand would be public access could also help to regain food sovereignty to countries as a first step, or to be a project of industrialization and also regain food sovereignty, if industrialization and reclaiming and regaining food sovereignty could be come hand in hand with these platforms. That's my questions for now. Yeah, and also like how this platform that would be public stores could not be captured by the private sector.
Thank you, Angelica. We'll
Thanks.
also give the floor, please. Let's try to do 1 minute, Elizabeth and Phelisa, and then we'll continue with the written questions. So Elizabeth, please.
Thank you, Nicolás. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Elizabeth. I am tuned in from Nairobi, Kenya. And thank you very much for this presentation. It is really exciting work that is going on. I have a couple of questions. I'll try to keep them short. One, do we see this tool as being useful in driving the international policy that might help to disaggregate the HS codes a little bit more? It seems like a simplistic question, but yeah, I'm curious. Would it be useful in that direction? And secondly, how robust is the accuracy of the information that we have aggregated in terms of the breakdowns of the value chains? How robust is it, and would it be a reliable source of resource in driving legislation in countries such as mine?
Thank you very much.
Back to you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Before going to Justus, Phelisa, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Phelisa Nkomo. I'm a development economist from South Africa. I've had an exposure of this. In fact, I think I support Elizabeth's first question on whether how could this be influential in really changing, and really disaggregating the HS codes in a lot more data, because I think it's a political economic question that could actually be resolved through this work. But I think I just want to say, I think, for Africa already, I think having been exposed, I think there are three things that this tool would really come handy. I think firstly is that it's quite useful as an industrial tool, right, at a national and regional level to deal with homogeneity of our economies. I think the second, but also encourage regional industrial planning. And then the second issue is that it's going to start really facilitating the participation of a younger generation of entrepreneurs who most of the time are in the margins because they just have no access to information. But I think the third issue, which I think for me I would really like, and probably can use this tool to increase advocacy work, is linked to human capital strategy at a regional level, linked to industrial planning. Because also you can't, there's a correlation between the amount of minerals that are deposited within our continent versus what we're able to manufacture or produce. But obviously without sufficient human capital, or without a clear human capital strategy, the risk we have is that perpetually we're always going to be the primary exporter of goods. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Phelisa. So now, Justus, we're back with you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Angelica, Elizabeth, Phelisa. These are all great points. I think I will take them in aggregated orders. So I start the one Angelica posed is the most complicated. I go last with it. So starting with Elizabeth and Phelisa's on whether or not this can be used to drive disaggregation of HS codes in general. I don't know. So the HS code system is being updated. There is a formal process for this every 5 years. So a new update is actually coming, and My first intuition is the HS code system was never designed for that. The HS code system is a system in order to facilitate customs, basically. So tariffs and being able to put to have a global system that makes this easy. It is of course also used in order to monitor trade on a global level, but it is, as far as I understand, and the way the categories are defined, the categories are not designed in order to have clear-cut input-output relationships. And this is exactly what you would need if you wanted to use these codes in order to map value chains. Of course, we need to always, when we map a value chain, we always need to be able to also use the trade data. It would be a waste of time. But the HS code is simply an attribute of a product or a component, and it should not be anything else, because the classes, again, they are negatively defined. They are infinite. Anything can go into this that does not fit into this. And we just don't know what is in there. We just don't know what went through customs that was actually in there. It is so I think the reason why HS codes became so popular for value chain analysis is simply that it is the only source of trade data that is already classified into some form of products. So it's being picked up, it's being used, and then it's being processed through so many steps that people forget that we're actually not talking about bicycles in this case. We're talking about also the parts of, I mean, we can represent, there is an HS code for bicycles, right? But then all the parts for bicycle parts, they also contain the motorcycle parts, and they also contain the wheelchair parts. So when we suddenly assume that that these parts are the parts of the bicycle, it just doesn't add up anymore. And this is really throughout the HS code system. And usually when we go on a platform or something that shows these dependencies, we don't see the name of the exact HS code, so it doesn't come to our minds that these categories actually mean something else, and the underlying data is probably different from that. But if you do this exercise, the exercise that we did here with the bicycles, I did not even expect that it was that terrible. I was really surprised at the very end when putting up the slide with the screenshot of the actual HS code definitions in the tables, that this was not even bicycle parts, but the motorcycles and the wheelchairs as well. So maybe that's a long answer. I doubt that it makes much sense, because it is not the reason for why the HS code system exists. Then, with regard to the human capital strategy, that's exactly what we have, what we are hoping for as well with this platform. The more accurate and detailed the representation of this technology tree in every step in the value chain is, we can just put tutorials up for each of them and can see this is what you need to do in order to put these things together. This is how the production method works. This is how this can be done with technologies for which all the IP has expired, etc. So that's definitely what we where we want to go with this. And to Angelica's question, and then right over to Paul. About food and agriculture. Yes, we are not limited to representing. We are not limited to representing only machinery. We actually have here a couple of value chains that we want to work on, and agricultural products are in there as well. Our vision for the work that we're currently discussing and gaining support from with the African Union and gaining support for is to, let me quickly show this again here, is to map these value chains and then identifying the productive capabilities regionally. And what we have seen, so we presented this tool 2 weeks ago in Kampala, Uganda, during Africa Industrialization Week, and there were, for example, African Women in Processing, which is a big AU group with chapters all over Africa. And what we've learned there is there are just so many producers, small producers, who do not, for example, have a website. So it is not clear whether or not. So how would I know if I'm based in Kampala? How would I know that just 20 miles away there's actually someone who potentially produces the input that I could need? Maybe 20 miles I can still capture. What about 50 miles? What about 100 miles, etc.? Generally, there's a really good report, and unfortunately, I don't have it open here. It's the Made by Africa report. It was conducted by the ITC and the African Union in 2022, and they do a very comprehensive analysis, again, based on HS codes, originally in order to identify the value chains, but nonetheless, then afterwards with 2,000 interviews, etc. And they identify four value chains that they want to focus on. One of them is infant foods. And throughout the different value chains, people, when asked why do they not buy, so producers, when they ask why do you buy your outputs from China or Europe, is often I simply did not know that the input existed in the region. So long story short, if we manage to just, at least those who have a web presence, identify that they exist, we put them on the map, and a producer can look up, I'm doing this and this, I need these inputs, this platform shows me exactly what inputs, where I can in principle get them from, and we allow them to calculate the logistical load that this would take. Then this would, for example, be in a step in the direction of fostering regional value chains. There's much more to your question, Angelica, but I leave it here simply in the interest of time.
Thank you, Justus. So now Paul Katz has also raised his hand. I will give you the floor, please, Paul, 1 minute. Then I will read you a couple more questions, Justus, and we start wrapping up.
Great, thanks, Nicolás, and really a pleasure to be here. I could not be more excited about this initiative. I was just in Kampala with Justus and with colleagues from I3T at Africa Industrialization Week, and have been in some virtual events with them as well. And I have to say the level of enthusiasm for the solutions that were presented today, and also for kind of the new configurations and potentially new financing vehicles that this makes possible, is really, really palpable. And so I just want to share very, very quickly, a perspective from a kind of another layer here, which is precisely this layer of financing. I think what is so exciting about this tool is that it makes it possible to, develop interventions that really do calibrate supply and demand, through, a very careful approach to public procurement-based targeting. I mean, you can, map using this tool, basically the set of companies, including small and medium enterprises, which, would be very hard to map otherwise, that are positioned to meet that demand or to scale to meet that demand. And then, I think that makes possible, financing solutions that are very, very carefully targeted, and that, maybe you can consider, future cash flows, especially receivables, as a factor in extending credit. And then you could imagine, not that securitization is some kind of silver bullet, but careful approaches to securitization that could enable tranching out a receivables based security in ways that are very attuned to the particular needs of different institutional investors, of investors who are positioned to enter at different levels in the capital stack, especially sovereign investors. And so in a context like Africa, where you've seen the rise of a lot of strategic sovereign development funds, I think the potential is really quite enormous for a holistic solution that thinks about supply and demand together. So really just couldn't be more excited for this new set of tools, and for the new doors and windows I think that they will open.
Thank you very much, Paul. And now, Justus, I apologize in advance, but I will read you 5 questions I know some of them have already been answered, but just to make sure we address all the questions that were made. First, Hannah, I know this was already mentioned in a first answer, but what does prevalence mean in your Sankey diagrams, dollar value or units? And if does this track only trade or also domestic production? Then Samantha is asking us about the accuracy and the confidence we have on the data to use it for legislation. And how can this be used in that sense? We have a question by Matthias. If we could map specialized labor, like university-linked skills, within the value chain locations. We do have a question by Carlos. If there are already value chains analysis available on the platform for specific sector and countries. We have congratulations first from Apratim, and then a question on how to automate the analysis of academic grade literature and trade journals. And finally, a question by Jose Manuel asking us about how do we handle the multi-use products like bearings that serve multiple industry. So I'm sorry for this, Justus, but we have to start wrapping up. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I took notes. Unfortunately, I did not catch all of the names, but Hannah's name I caught. So prevalence, I think I hope this was answered. It really is it is an attempt of providing a relative rate between 0 and 1, all summing up to 1 between the different types that are available for a particular system category. That's what it is, and in different contexts, this means slightly different things. For Samantha, the robustness of the data, and I now also realized this was a question that Elizabeth Ouma asked before, and I did not answer it. So the robustness of the data is can be improved for sure. So this is we basically, with every iteration, with every new version of the algorithm, we improve something that we have noticed in a previous version was not as good. At the moment, what you can see when you actually go to the platform, there's the solar PV value chain, and there's a little warning sign at the Sankeys, and there's also an info box, and the info box tells you something about the nature of the algorithm in brief terms, and then the triangle tells you what the shortcomings of the current version are. I can already tell you in the solar PV value chain, when you go further upstream, we did not run it to the very end when we did all of the estimates of the different rates, because we needed to get it up in time. This is all still preliminary. This being said, it is already much more robust than many of the published papers that you actually find that represent value chains. I can give you an example. When we ran the first robustness test a year ago in a collaboration with the World Bank, we had a much more shaky version of our algorithm. We found a data set from the WTO for solar PV systems. We used the data set that the World Bank uses internally. We compared them with one another in order to establish a benchmark. Two really important organizations in this space, 25% overlap between the two data sets. So the environment is extremely noisy. Why is the environment noisy? It is not because people don't do good work. It is simply the HS code system does not allow for doing this properly. This was the idea behind taking so much time doing the first 10 minutes. What value chain analysis is on the platform at the moment? There's only the solar PV system. Everything else is sitting behind logins at the moment, because we are financing this from Rubidi project-based work. Our goal is to make this publicly available to really solve this need that this kind of data does not exist. Then there was the question how to automate the analysis of literature and trade journals review. There are many ways of thinking about this. Maybe we can pick this up since there are only 3 minutes left. But yeah, I don't have an immediate answer to this. And how to handle multi-use products used in industry. It is already a little bit better when we actually can look at a particular product and don't have it in an aggregated form. But yeah, when we find a bearings provider, we don't know whether this bearing goes into a car or goes into a wheelchair or something. What we, however, do, and maybe because it would be sad to have forgotten this, which I actually forgot to show. We are working. We also have this tool. We are currently starting with the European Commission to survey 2,000 firms in 34 different European countries in their local language. This is a way of running completely interview-based, doing interview-based data collection. So this is a chatbot that behaves like a qualitative researcher and basically asks follow-up questions depending on whatever type of information you want to collect. This is a way of doing this. Here we have also put out a bit of the evidence that that these qualitative researchers are really perform really well, and I leave it here. Thank you very much. Great questions.
Thank you very much, Justus, and thank you everyone who has participated so far. So for closing remarks, I give the floor to Isabel.
Thank you, Nico. Thanks so much again to everyone for joining us today, to our speakers, to the commentators, to the audience, and those who posed questions. I think at our peak, we had about 80 people with us, out of about 120 plus that registered. So we're happy to see so much interest and growing interest in our tools. Again, just want to remind you that you should feel free to reach out to us at any point. We are growing a dynamic community and we're keen to collaborate. Today, we just scratched the surface of how these tools can be used and are being used in specific geographies. So if you want to learn more about how they apply to the geographies that you work on, we're very happy to connect. And with that, I think I'll just close us out and wish you all happy holidays from the whole team at the Data Lab. Thank you so much.